My name is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is April 18th, and I'm interviewing Donald Vann for the Oklahoma Native Artist Project sponsored by Oklahoma Oral Histories Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We are here with Donald in Tahlequah. Donald, you've been recognized as a nationally, you're one of the most prominent Indian artists of your time. You've had a long career that shows no signs of slowing down, and you're back in Tahlequah after 41 years in Texas, I understand.
That's right. We are looking forward to doing a lot of things here in the area once we kind of get squared away with our business. Currently, when you're just moved back to an area, there's a lot of work to be done, so that's what we're working on right now.
Well, we're glad to have you back in Oklahoma.
Thank you.
Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, actually, I was born here in Oklahoma, over in Adair County, there outside of Stillwell. And let's see, back in 1949.
And what did your folks do for a living?
Well, my father, he did a lot of labor and jobs. There's so many jobs that he did over time that's kind of hard to describe exactly what he was doing, but for the 32 years that I remember, he was working for the Alabama Charcoal Company in Barron. And then he went on to do other jobs with the tribe, and then he retired like 25 years ago.
And I understand your grandparents lived close by?
My grandparents did live just only a few hundred yards from where I was brought up, and my grandfather was my biggest inspiration growing up. He had a big influence on most of the things I remember being some of the artwork that I do. He had great knowledge of the spiritual world and the medicines. He was a holy man, so he and I spend a lot of time together.
And I understand you also, in addition to learning those kinds of things, also spent time hunting with your grandfather.
Yes, you know, one of the things that I remember years later, one of the things that I remember about growing up back there in Adair County outside of Stillwell was that I was very fortunate to have two sets of grandparents, which a lot of us usually do, and they were both a big part of my growing up. And on my father's side, his name was White Vann, and he was the more into the mountains and hunting, and he was the one that taught me a lot. So he was a big influence in being out there in the woods and the wilderness, and so a lot of the things that I know about that general area is due to my grandfather on my father's side. But my grandfather on my mother's side was a holy man, and he was a medicine, you know, they call them medicine men, raven mockers. He was always healing people, and I say raven mockers. He didn't hide that he was, and that's another thing that I'd like to talk about. Raven mockers, people who don't know, never really grew up with that knowledge. It's just only one of the things that they learn from books or people talking about them. Raven markers were not all that bad. There's a lot of things that are written about raven markers is false. People who wrote about these books did not grow up around them. And I do not remember one person that he ever harmed. He was always doing good medicine for people. I can talk in great depth about that maybe a little bit later.
Well, I wonder, what are your first memories of drawing or painting? Your very first kind of memories of trying to draw something or paint something?
Well, the first time that I remember getting paid for anything that I did was back when I was in the 5th grade. Lucille Starr, who was my first, second, and third grade school teacher, had me do like religious drawings for a project. I forgot exactly what it was about, and she paid me 75 cents. And I thought that was a lot of money back in those days. So that kind of got me kind of interested in, well, if I can get 75 cents for these drawings, and maybe I could do something else and get more money out of it. But that was not until much later, though, so that kind of put the hook in me.
Well, I understand from reading a little bit about your early life that you sort of had to make your own painting supplies when you started out.
Yes, I did, because back in those days, finance was very, very limited, and whatever finance that the parents made went to raising the family, and there was nothing available to buy professional equipment. And so actually I kind of imitated a lot of the paintbrushes that I've seen a lot of people using or used, and I would clip off the little hair on the tip of dogs' tails. They're kind of pointed. And I would tie them with the rubber band or twine onto a stick to make a paintbrush, and I melted crayons for paint. Of course, they got hard real quick too.
Well, that's very creative. Was one of the pluses of being in elementary school then that you had access to some supplies through the school?
At school I did, but a lot of times back in those days they did not want you to take anything away from the school. Sometimes I actually stole a few things just so I could.
Right.
But nobody ever missed them anyway.
Experiment at home. Did they offer art classes per se, or did they just at the elementary level?
Well, the only art classes, if you will, was when I got into the 3rd and 4th and 5th grades. There was a lady, his last name was Catron, from Vian, Shirley Catron, and she had been educated in art at a university where she went to, and every Friday everybody looked forward to was the afternoon where everybody was going to do art of their choice. And she was very instructive, very good about color and material, and whatever the school provided, is what we used for art back in those days, and she was one of the most beautiful lady I'd ever seen who was a teacher. And she really enjoyed what I did, and she paid especially close attention to what I was doing, because she said that I was much further ahead in that area than any other students were. Even though I didn't do well in all three grades, third, fourth, and fifth, but she said that I did very well in the art area, so I made straight A's.
It's wonderful to have that kind of support and encouragement. What kinds of images did you create in your free?
Yeah, back
free
in
art
those
time?
days, let's see, the Beatles were starting to come in back in those days. So I did a lot of drawing of the Beatles, the group, and then also cars, and then also different types of animals that I was doing, like horses. Even though horses were kind of like a premium back in those days, not everybody had them. I was lucky enough to be able to grow up at home where my grandfather had horses. So I knew and studied about the anatomy. But cars, not everybody had cars, so I had to guess at that. The Beatles, you see them on TV a lot, so I knew what they looked like.
You spoke Cherokee at home?
Actually, Cherokee was my first language growing up. I didn't learn to speak English until I was like 5, 6, maybe 7 years old. And that was one of the hard things about being in a public school. A lot of times we were punished for speaking Cherokee in class. And it's just one of those things that reminds me this was only just a few years ago in time.
Right.
And but we were allowed to speak Cherokee out there in recess time, almost on the grounds. I remember some of my cousins getting whipped. And even I got a little bit of discipline, which was very traumatic to, when you're young like that.
It is. Did you have any extended family, uncles, or anybody who painted?
Actually, none of my uncles were in that area, but I remember a distant relative who was always doing some drawings, and his name was Charles Leo Vann from Pryor. And every once in a while he would come over. Of course, he was a lot older than I at the time and already well developed in his talent. And I admired a lot what he did. Today you can see some of his work around Pryor, Salina.
Was that maybe your first examples of Indian art that you saw?
Well, that was my first example of something that a developed artist did that was quality work. And that really, really impressed me. And years later, it was an honor to meet a upcoming artist from Muskogee, Oklahoma. And his name was Jerome Tiger. And he and his agent, Nettie Wheeler, had a big impact on my developing into the point where I am today. And Jerome was probably one of the biggest, the most important influence.
That's interesting, because I think you both sort of have that same love of anatomy, the rendering of the human body in this very beautiful way. How did you meet Jerome the first time?
Well, it was kind of one of those things for a young kid my age in grade school. Had a hard time at that time being in class. We walked like about several miles to school back in those days, by choice actually. That was, and then later on we got a regular school bus to ride in, but before then it was kind of like a wrench truck that used to come and pick us up. But since school was not that far, we walked to school. Sometimes we got there. And most of the times we didn't, and so social workers were out to help children my age to give more of a direction. A lot of these programs that was coming up back at that time, and I'd like to go back down to the time of John F. Kennedy's time. He started a lot of tech schools back in those days. There was only, I think, about 3 at the time. If I'm wrong, correct me. But they were Job Corps centers, and so this social worker came over to the house one time and said that I was reported as being a problem student, and there's an option that you can take, either Job Corps or, and I also know that you have this talent, and also I'm acquainted or heard of this lady in Muskogee, and that could help you. So she took me over to Muskogee to the Thunderbird gift shop, met Nettie Jane Wheeler, and she said, this is what I'm doing with Jerome Tiger. I'd never heard of the name before until then. And she named other known artists of those times and before, named A.C. Blue Eagle and Paul Posatopa and all those kind of guys. Never heard of them. So she said that this is what I'm helping them do, and I'd like to develop you, and Jerome is willing to meet you and help you with it too. So we did, and Jerome was one of the most fantastic person that I had ever met. Some of the things that he was doing, I was just like at awe. I thought he was, like a god. Even though Jerome was Creek, he was not Cherokee. We both resonated extremely well. He said, you have something that I see that you can develop. And he told me that you have to do it on your own way. Don't copy me, is what he said. But everybody did at that time. And that went over very well for about maybe a couple of seasons, I believe it was. And then I was still having that problem in school, so I looked at Job Corps.
Had you been meeting with Jerome over at Nettie's or going over there about once a week?
Yes, I did go on to Job Corps. I went up to Anaconda, Montana. I was there for two years. 2 years. I want to say maybe 2 months, maybe 3. For whatever you wanted to learn, they taught you there. So I learned heavy equipment and maintenance, and I got it earned a GED at the time. And then I came back from Job Corps and started right back up with Nettie and Jerome at the time. And right after that, Jerome passed away, which was
must have been very hard on you.
Very, very devastating to me, because I admired him so much that today, his memory has a very big impact on me.
Mm-hmm. Were you at that point, Donald, about 17 or 16?
No, actually, I was going on 15 then.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I went back to high school. Even though I had a GED, technically graduated in '68, but I had to take a half a year over again to graduate. And by that time, I was working full-time as a professional artist. And
That's wonderful. Showing mainly in Nettie's gallery, or?
well, Nettie Wheeler was still my agent at the time, and she had full control of my work, and she was selling my artwork all over the country, and we were doing shows. Let's see, I think it was in '66 or '67, the Five Civilized Tribes Museum art show. I think that was the first time when they had that there, I believe. My memory kind of lags a little bit. Johnny Tiger, and I forget who that, and Virginia Stroud. We were the first place winners over there at that time.
You remember who the judges were?
I forgot who the judges were. It might have been Kilpatrick, I believe it was, the last name.
Jean Kilpatrick.
Yeah. And then Maurice Davina, I believe, was another judge at that time. He was a news name for Tulsa artwork, the Tulsa World at that time. I think, okay? Because this is long ago, so.
Was that like your first big museum show?
It was one of the biggest. It was one of the biggest moments of my life, and everybody's congratulating you, and then of course everybody's saying, you know, we're sorry that Jerome's not here, you know, and all that, and not tooting my own horn or anything like that, but pretty much thereafter, people thought I was going to be the next Jerome Tiger, because I was doing a lot of that type of work. And then also when I used to go to his house and paint on his table, they thought that I was going to be filling that, and I told them I never would, because Jerome was an artist that did what he did, and nobody could ever fit his shoes. Nobody ever has. And we all go on to do what we do, you know. And that's one of the things he always said was, don't let anybody tell him what to do. You do what the Spirit tells you, is what he always said. Mm. He was a very spiritual man.
That's neat. I remember looking at some of your earlier pieces that, and this is true of a lot of artists because your style is always evolving, but that was the time when people were leaving a lot of negative space sort of around the images. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what your image was for the Five Tribes Museum?
I couldn't really tell you exactly what they were, but maybe roughly pulling an image out of the air, they probably were the Trail of Tears, because everybody was painting the Trail of Tears back in those days.
Yeah, right.
And stickball players.
Right. What was your next career move, I guess, after that, or transition after selling with Nettie for a while?
Well, I came home from the war in '73, and Nettie was at a very old age, and she was in the hospital, going in the hospital at that time. Another gentleman from Austin and I picked up together, and we started our own company down in Austin, which was the OOHRP Galleries, and he does the same role as that Nettie Wheeler did. He was my agent for over 40 years.
And so traveled to different shows with you.
Yes, we went all over the world with our shows.
What are some of the places that were highlights that you traveled to?
And what now?
Highlights. Well,
Well,
one or two of the outside the country, I
yeah,
guess.
well, I guess being able to visit foreign countries in Europe, England, and people who had never experienced my type of work before. Of course, I was not the first American Indian artist to be shown in those areas, because it goes so far back, you know, that some of the old timers actually visited Germany, Switzerland, England, Rome, but they had their own style, but this was their first time experiencing what I did. And it was well received, especially in Germany. A lot of the German people had a very, very big admiration for the Native Americans.
And were you working in watercolors from the very beginning, I guess? What was your style like at that point when you were?
Well, like I said earlier, most of my styles were like the Jerome Tiger styles, you know. Everybody else who was upcoming artists had that style too. Everybody was copying him. And of course there were good artists out there that did very, very good work, but they didn't have that creativity that Jerome had. So they thought, well, I can draw just as good as he can. If I can draw just as good as he can, I can make money. Money was the big thing back in those days. And a lot of them did copy down to detail what he did. But as the era went on, and people who were gifted to do their own way, they couldn't keep up, so they fell off to the wayside. And today, nobody knows what became of them. And then there's others that just popped up out of nowhere overnight too. And you go out New York and California and places like that, and nobody ever heard of them. Because they thought that they could do the same things that Jerome did. And a lot of that circulated out so quickly, people just kind of burned out, you know. So now people are looking for individuals who have their own spirit style. And again, not tooting my own horn, because it took me years to develop what I do now.
How did you find your way into these, like the really detailed landscapes? Was it a gradual?
Well, it takes a lot of in-depth thinking about where you're at with your work. Like a lot of shows you go to, people say, "Oh, you paint like this person," you know, "you paint like that person." And I didn't think so, you know. When you stand back and look at it, yeah, I did, you know. What about doing what Donald Vann can do? And I'm talking about years ago, where it's developed into, from the early beginning, and then up to what it is today, because you have to listen to anything that inspires the soul, not how people paint. That sometimes some paintings do inspire you, but you know that doesn't mean you have to go copy it. But you have to listen to nature. You have to listen to your spirit and your heart, and you have to listen to what maybe the elders said a long time ago.
Well, I think that's one thing I really love about your paintings is they don't just, it's not that just the eyes that they appeal to. There's a whole sensory experience with that painting. You know, it's like you see, you hear things, you know, whether it's the mist or the smoke or whatever. You get that, almost can get the feeling of being out inside that landscape. Are you consciously kind of striving for that, or is it just coming from that?
Well, I'm always striving for something something that inspires. Just like right now, you can look outside and see the moving leaves. That could trigger an inspiration or something. You can hear the wind blow. A lot of times that will inspire if it's just the right time. Even sometimes one word that a person can say can inspire a whole finished painting in your head. Even a bird flying can inspire something. And so you're always open. I guess the inner soul of you is listening all the time, and you know it when you hear it.
There have kind of been two different threads that run through your work, and one has been Cherokee imagery, and another has been Plains imagery. When did you first get interested?
Well, you know, that has been one of the most powerful questions that a lot of people have asked me for many years. You're Cherokee and you're doing Plains Indians. Well, back at the time of the popularity, the beginning of the popularity of Indian art, paintings, if you will, people didn't really recognize Cherokees as Indian, because Cherokees were very big in copying the European way of lifestyle and dress-wise, and they copied the headdress, the coats, which was the turban, which was not traditional, and they didn't wear feathers. They didn't ride the horses. They didn't ride they didn't live in teepees. So I kind of had to go back into a kind of a generically kind of a thing to portray the American Indian, not tribalize, but just kind of like generically say that this is what the Plains Indians did, because I don't know enough about, in detail, of all tribes out there who are Plains tribes, to say that this is the Sioux, this is the Arapaho, this is the Cheyenne, because I dare not. Because if you do, you better know you better know it. But when it comes to Cherokee, I can, because I know more about Cherokees than other people who are paying Cherokees, and I speak the language too, fluently. Going back to the thought, at the time when I was painting Plains type themes, that's what the general public was looking for at the time. Because when people think of Indian paintings, they want to see them riding the horses, chasing buffalo, feathers in their hair, burial themes of scalpels, living in teepees, etc., like that. That's why I did that, because that's what was selling back in those times. I could paint a Cherokee painting, and it would sit there, nobody would know what it was. They didn't, because Cherokees didn't have the feathers in their hair.
Right. I think a lot of artists went through that, and it sort of was a give and take, where the artists sort of educated the public and brought them along a little bit, but you still have to make a living. Right.
Well, that's what was sold back in those days, and even some of the at a certain time period back in the 80s, when we went to a Western and Indian show in Denver, Colorado, and I'm one person that appreciates Western paintings. I really do. I think they do great work. But back at that time, Western art was not selling. So when we got there, I looked around. I wanted to see some cowboy paintings. They were all painting Indians. Because cowboy art wasn't selling. Even the mountain man painters, they were painting Indians, it went through a different kind of a period at the time when people taste kind of, was all Indian thoughts. And then right after Dances with Wolves, my God, the Indian stuff just exploded, So everybody wanted something to do with Indians at the time. Everybody was part Cherokee back in. We had so many people come to our shows who claimed to be Cherokee, with their great grandmothers being Cherokee princesses. I told them my great great grandfather was a Cherokee princess. We don't talk about him though. Keep him in the closet. It was a big joke on that.
Yeah.
There were no Cherokee princesses back in those days, but that was a hobbyist thing.
You've always incorporated animal imagery in your paintings, and I understand you were involved at one point with a wolf project in Minnesota.
Yes, when I lived in Minnesota, there was a time when I had a couple of residences, and I did a lot of my work right outside of Minneapolis in the winter months, and I had a lot of collectors who actually lived up in those areas, and then also some real good collectors who lived in Madison. They worked with the wildlife biologist research there out at the university, and they knew that I was very much into wolf imageries by that time, and was invited to go with them for the time when there was so many Canadian wolf packs that were coming into Minnesota at that time, and they were all coming into the boundary waters. And of course, when you have so many packs that come in into the United States in that area, then there's problems. So anyway, to make a long story short, I was asked to if I wanted to join them for that time, which I did, and it gave me a really great photography opportunity and movie opportunity. And wildlife biologists are good with wildlife, but they're not good trackers. And so the project was to count undocumented packs. Is what it was. The Boundary Waters was not funded for that kind of an expedition, which was totally voluntarily, and so that's what our part was to document undocumented packs coming into the Boundary Waters. If you get too many packs in one area, they start killing each other, or they start killing off too much livestock or wildlife in those areas. The sad part was that some of them had to be put away as they contacted them, not from our, but we just documented where all these packs were, because a pack of 10 to 12 wolves need at least about 75 miles square of their territory, and you get 15 to 20 packs in 75 miles square. That's not good. So that was our part to that.
And you did this for about a year, or?
Actually, no, I didn't do that as a total year. We were out there 2 times, and each time, the first time was the longest time, which was over 6 weeks that we were out there, and then the second time was going towards the fall. The first time you had to go into spring, to see what packs have litter, and then in the spring you go back out to those same areas to see how they thrived, or had they moved on elsewhere, and a lot of times they didn't. They were actually not doing well. The last time when we were there in September of that year, they were eating bugs. There was a lot of insects in their diet.
Sometimes the business part of art is the hardest part to learn. And it sounds like you've been fortunate to have a lot of good business partners. In terms of what you print and when you print, that's sometimes a difficult call. How do you go about deciding what makes a good print?
Well, actually, right now, today, as we speak, I'm very blessed with a whole new company set up, and I have. I'm very blessed by the Great Spirit, the Creator, that I have a partner that is very talented, very gifted. He's an artist in his own way of marketing and understanding these things. And Scott Bernard has been really a great inspiration to me in a lot of ways, and in also making those kind of decisions. He and I resonate so well together. We think a lot, almost.
That's great.
So he's the printer, and he's the editor, and he's my CEO, and he's the man that says, "Yep, it'll sell." "Nope, it won't sell."
So we're talking kind of about actually in-house printing that your company does.
Yes, we do. We have our own our own printer set up, and we're looking forward to purchasing bigger printers a little bit later, so we can do a lot bigger G-clays. And then again, he being an expert in technology, he's the man that knows how to make G-clays work in a way that is higher quality than some of the other G-clays out there that we've seen printed. We're trying to do away with offset printing, because offset printing is something that's kind of a thing of the past now. And G-clays on canvases is something that's the end thing today, right now. But you can print G-clays on thicker paper. They look nice, but something about printing on canvas that gives it that quality, that class look.
Right. And you may not really feel, well, you may not feel like I know you were selling on a national level, and so maybe not as quite in Oklahoma, around the Oklahoma Indian art scene as consistently from decade to decade. But I'm wondering what changes you saw between the 80s, which we were talking about, Oklahoma Indian art in the 80s, and then in the 90s.
Well, I think in the 80s into the 90s was a great boom for any kind of art, tribal art, jewelry, paintings. Not tooting my own horn, but we did extremely well in the 80s. But something happening going towards the 90s where it started kind of slowly taking backseat to everything else going on. As I said earlier, we need another movie about Dances with Wolves or something like that to kind of people get refocused, but it'll have to be a lot of doing to do that, because right now I believe that a lot of the general mass-produced trinket stuff, I hate to say that, because, and that's what it is, it's trinket, that people has put out there that has kind of ruined the market. Europeans come here, the Japanese, the Chinese come here, they think this trinket stuff that was made overnight is it, and then they look at something that's handmade jewelry or a painting that took months to do. They look at the price and they go, "My God, I can't, I don't want to pay that. I can buy this little trinket over here, and it's the real thing, And that's where the hobbyists came in and ruined all of that. Even though all due respect to them, you know, they have to make money too. They have to earn their living. But that's where where card carrying idea came in. You know, federally recognized Indians, blood cards came in. So where people like this can't show at Indian shows. If you don't have those cards on you, they won't let you in because they're trying to weed all that out, where quality control is brought back in. But still, you know, it'd be a long time before that will happen. There's still a market out there, but people will only buy something unique that's totally different. You can go to Santa Fe. The last Indian market I was at Santa Fe, I was not showing. I remember Santa Fe's 20, 30 years ago where there were hordes and masses of people all over Santa Fe. You couldn't even hardly walk. The last time I was there, it was only like, you know, streets were empty. The galleries were empty almost. Even the market itself was not as big as it used to be. And everywhere you look, galleries had pots. How many pots can you have? Paintings and jewelry, pawn jewelry, and then also outside of Santa Fe there were these trinket people, you know, jewelry made in China, Japan, plastic, turquoise stones, you know, and I think it just kind of burned out. You know, people have pretty much burned out of it. You go out to New York, same thing. But you have to find that right person that's still interested in something totally unique that is original, and they know it too, then they'll buy it.
I was going to ask you when the last time you did Santa Fe Indian Market as a show was.
I lost my shirt.
Was it in the 90s or?
Yes, I went in '94, and it was not good. Mm-hmm. But you heard about people doing well, but it depends on what you do, you know, as well to them. It was. I was very disappointed with that.
You're getting ready to open a studio as well as a gallery here in partnership with Scott in Tahlequah.
Yes, my partner and I, Scott, were working very hard into finding the right location here in Tahlequah. And then when that comes about, then we're going to work on setting up our own gallery. And then also we may look into setting up a frame shop with computerized framing equipment, and then also a teaching area so we can bring in other talented people to come and teach young people who are looking to develop their talents. And these kind of young people will be highly, if you want to say, interviewed, where, you know, not just to waste their time, but a young person who is really focused into the future with their talent. Mm-hmm. And those are the kind of people that we want to work with, because a lot of times kids will come off the street and say, oh, I want to learn how to paint, you know, before you know it, they're in prison or they're doing something else. So that's a waste of time. So we'll be looking at working with young people who are totally focused in their artistic abilities and their talent for maybe develop with themselves into the future. But if they want to go and do something else with their education, then we'll be, you know, we'll certainly be happy to back them up on that. But at least they would have had that certain kind of credibility that, you know, we'll say, yes, they did attend our classes.
Will this be your first time really teaching young people?
I've never really taught any young people per se in that length, but just coaching here or there, I guess would be the best way to answer that, because I never had a place where I could really, do that. But once we get our location, then we'll be able to fulfill that dream that we have. Because right now, looking around here in the local area, Tahlequah, Stillwell, Westville, there's a lot of young people who are loaded with talent, but there's nobody here to encourage them. Even some of the tribal leaders aren't doing anything to encourage them. And I don't want to say names, but I think that if that little part that we will do will help them, give them direction in that area, then it would have been well worth what we're wanting to do.
Sounds wonderful. You pretty much paint exclusively in watercolors, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, I do. I experimented with a lot of other media years ago, and watercolor gouache has been one of the best working media for me, and also I'm very knowledgeable in airbrush techniques also too, so a lot of that stuff we'll be teaching the young people too once we get this started.
So using this combination of watercolors with some gouache occasionally, how important is underpainting for you?
Say that again?
How important do you do a lot of underpainting, like layers of color with your...
Well, it is important because that's what's going to give you the base of your painting as you come forward. Because underpainting actually to me means that your background focus has to be just as important as your foreground focus, and you have to get that right.
I understand you have some pretty nice brushes. Is it important? You have a real range of everything from the super small ones?
$400 right here.
Oh my goodness.
These are all handmade in England.
Wow.
So anyway, the quality of equipment is what makes the quality of your work come out. I've seen artists who use dime store type brushes or Michael's hobby store brushes, Grumbacher's, Dick Blick's, who are like $20, $30. And if you're trying to do a $10,000, $15,000, $25,000 painting, you better be using good equipment. That's how important equipment is.
What about preliminary drawings? Do you sketch everything out beforehand, or?
Yes, I do. What I like to do is do several drawings of different poses, because I noticed that a lot of artists do their drawing, their experimental drawings right on the board or right on the canvas without doing a preliminary drawing first. I do like 5 at a time. Then that way you can overlap each one and see which one you want to work with. You can do all your mistakes on a drawing first and change it if you will. But some of the artists I've seen will go right directly to the board canvas they're going to be working on, and they're erasing as they're going along, and then they paint around it, and you can see the pencil marks that's not good. that's why I do mine first, and then you transfer it on to your canvas or watercolor board, because the main focus is to finish your background first, and then concentrate on the main figures of what it will be, whatever it may be, onto the finished background. Then that way you don't have all these pencil drawings and erase marks, and you're not painting around it.
Have you ever tried just painting landscapes, or has anybody ever suggested you could just be a landscape painter?
I have had many people who have asked me to do just landscape, not necessarily any Indian subject matters on them. And that's fine. Sometimes landscapes can speak for themselves. You can even put maybe a simple bird on there, or maybe a rabbit, or maybe a wolf with a nice landscape, and that will mean a lot to people who are who feel it spiritually. But I'm not a landscape artist.
That's not your interest. Just
no, but I do them as a background.
Right.
To me, if I did a landscape, then it's incomplete. I have to have something up front.
Understand. Do you take photographs for your landscape, or do you just rely on memory?
I do photograph references. I do like to do my own photography, and then also my partner Scott a lot of times will take photographs of sunsets for me while if we're going down the road, or if we're doing something. It's just nice that somebody also has the same eye that I do, and I know that it's going to be what that I wanted to look at as my background.
You use that for...
It's always nice to do references, because it's forever changing. Say like if it's in an evening, you got a beautiful sunset going on, you look at it again, the next 5 seconds it's changed, and then there's that one scene that it's going to be at awe. You want that picture, and you want to capture that on camera, because the mind is not going to remember every detail.
I think you're just really masterful at airbrush and getting those effects the airbrush can give. Do you want to talk a little bit about, and there was a time when several Indian artists were into airbrush, but when you discovered it and what you liked about it?
Well, I think airbrush is a very neat tool, and then also airbrush actually is a lot harder tool to work with than the paintbrush is, because the airbrush, you are always suspended above your paper or your canvas, and you never have contact with the surface like you do with the brush. So there's no room for mistakes with airbrush, but if you master it right and you know exactly how it works, and you got your colors right, you'll do well with an airbrush. It's a very nice tool to work with. It's clean. You can do backgrounds, the skies with the airbrush. It's clean. A lot of artists who use oils or acrylics, they'll use a brush, a flat brush, and they'll go stroking across it. And then when you look at it, it's going to have that brush stroke look. Even with it blend in with other colors, it's going to have that strokey look. But the airbrush is clean. You don't see those stroke looks on it. But the other technique with acrylics or oils, they look nice from afar, but when you walk right up to it, they have that strokey look to them. But airbrush, it's flat, it's clean, and then where the blends come in, they're perfect. That's what's so nice about airbrush. And the rest is up to the artist how well they master the airbrush.
How important is telling a story in your work? There seem to be kind of two veins. One is establishing a mood. That seems to be a part of your work, but also this idea of telling a story.
Yes, you're correct. Setting the mood is very important, and then what you want to put in is up to whatever you feel is going to tell the story. A lot of times, even like I said earlier, just a simple bird sitting there can tell a whole story. And then also some of the images that we're looking at here in the studio have a lot of Cherokee images in the paintings, and that's what's important is what they're doing, because it sets the mood, and then you see exactly what's going on. Like one that we're looking at, they're looking at an eagle who had just caught a fish and is in flight out, and these are Cherokee Indians that just came out onto the rocks there, and they're not canoes but dugout canoes, because Cherokees didn't have birch bark canoes, and to them it's kind of like a sign of it's a sacred thing to see an eagle, and also it's a sign that this is a good omen and this is a good place for them to be. And then also in the background, the sunset also has just this mood setter, actually.
Mm-hmm. Do you does your story kind of stop with the image, or do you go so far as to kind of imagine what was happening the moment before and then what's going to happen when they leave?
Well, sometimes I do that. I'll do a continuation of it sometimes, and then sometimes you don't need to go that far. It just stops like that. You know, there's no need. But sometimes you're working on a painting, and then something else inspires you, like all of these other images start coming in. You know, before you finish the painting, there's already another painting that you see.
So, and you've kind of addressed this a little bit, but what is your creative process like from the time you get an idea?
Well, a creative process can be from whatever inspired at the time. Like I was saying earlier, whatever the inspiration is, it's the beginning of the creative process. Sometimes it can be just maybe watching a person, or maybe just a leaf turning. A lot of times can have a lot to do with it. And a lot of times you think back of stories that maybe grandparents told you, or the elders told you. And those stories are always ticking in the back of your head, and those inspire creative processes.
Do you, will you sketch something down real quick when it occurs to you, or do you just kind of file it away mentally?
To me, I kind of lock it in memory, and I give it a title.
Mm.
And then when the opportunity comes, then I'll sit back behind my drawing board and look up that title in my head, and out comes that inspiration, that thought that I thought about. Because not all the time does artists carry sketchbooks around.
I'm sure you've always had some humor in your work, but I saw on some of these more recent prints there's a lot of humor. I'm thinking about the one where the hunters, climbed up the tree, and the bear, he's followed by the bear cubs and then their mom, and then at the bottom of the tree is the skunk. So I just wonder why the importance of humor in your work, if you could talk about that a little bit.
I like to think that there was a lot of humor that was going on out there at the time, or even today too. Everything's not always where you're starving and you're cold and hungry and somebody's out trying to do away with you. I believe that there were a lot of humorous things that went on out there. The one that you're talking about with the bears climbing up the tree was totally just a creative kind of thing out of my own sense of humor.
Right, it's a humorous situation as well as a funny title.
If that can happen to anybody, it's going to happen to me.
Yeah.
But one thing is, though, a lot of people love that image. But one thing is that they fail to see the skunk at the bottom of the tree. They see the bears. They see the bears climbing up behind the Indian climbing up, and a lot of times the skunk is right there in front of them, but they don't really see it.
Oh, but that's what makes the title work. A really bad day.
Yeah, having a bad day. And then also, too, skunks do climb trees, too.
Yeah. They're
So
all
that was just kind of a creative kind of thing that I came up with on that part, and people enjoyed that. Again, like I said, that Indians were not always out there cold, tired, and hungry, and turmoils, and etc. A lot of funny things was going on out there. The Great Spirit has humor.
Right. Have you ever experimented with sculpture at all?
I've never really tried serious sculpture before. I tried one time, and it just was not my. Was not my thing.
Not your thing. What's your creative routine? Is there something you do like every day? Or
my creative routine? Trying to make money.
Do you try to spend a certain number of hours painting, or does it just depend on the day?
No, all joking aside, actually, I spend as much time as I can when I'm in a work mode.
Right.
I can set up 36 to 48 hours at a time, non-stop. And sometimes you're really on the roll, I think that's what they call that. I stayed up 3 days one time without sleep. And then you take a break, and then you go right back onto it. And it's trying to build a better mousetrap kind of thing,
Do you would you rather paint during the day or at night, or does it matter? Just when you're in the flow?
Again, it's whatever the mood has you in. It doesn't matter day or night.
Yeah.
So you're nonstop. You're working.
They run together when you.
Yeah, it's kind of like a freight train, from the coast to coast. It doesn't stop until it gets to the other end, day and night.
Well, looking back over your career, what was a turning point for you?
A turning point of.
Maybe when you might have gone this direction, but you decided to go that way. Or...
I don't think there really ever was a turning point, because I've always done this for a living. I've painted all my life.
You knew this was what you wanted to do from a very young age.
I love what I do. I enjoy what I do, and also too, the biggest reward is when you do an image that is well done and people resonate with that, and they feel from that. You don't have to explain to them. It projects to them spiritually inside, and a lot of people have cried in front of my paintings.
That's a wonderful.
Because they felt that much without even having to explain anything to them. And that's what really gives me that fulfillment, that I did something that even if they couldn't afford it, they couldn't even buy the print, at least I touched somebody, or somebody got touched with what I don't want to say I did. The spiritual artist, the spirit artist that work through me are the ones that did that. I'm just a tool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a tool.
Mm-hmm. What's been one of the highlights of your career?
I guess, again, going back to what I was just saying, the highlights of my career has been being able to touch people with what I do. That's the biggest highlight you can get. Monetarily, that's fine too. A lot of artists, we work for a living just like everybody else, but sometimes monetarily comes secondary when you see people. I mean, just plain people out there who are touched by what you're doing. That's the biggest highlights of my artwork, and I could ask for no bigger reward than that.
What's been one of the low points in your career so far?
Let's see. Seeing other artists who tried many years to make it a go, and seeing them destroy themselves. Not my low point, but as my view, to them is I see that as a low point about somebody who had a wonderful career, and then all of a sudden they something happened that they just didn't do anything about it. But if you want to say my low points, my view of the low points is that because they could have done something, but sometimes things happen in their career where you can't help them, and hopefully I'm strong enough where I can avoid that.
Does it kind of feel like your career's coming full circle by moving back here to Oklahoma?
Well, yes and no. I guess that's going to be something to remain to be seen. I really don't know what to expect, but I know what our goals are. We're going to work on our goals, and because nobody is going to help us, so we're going to do it ourselves. Whatever happens around us, then that's out there. Like I said, we have focused on our future goals, and we're going to go for it the best way we can.
Friendships with artists, as you've mentioned several times in different ways, starting with Jerome Tiger's friendship, have been really important in your life. I'm wondering if that's still a big thread, if it's nice to be able to reconnect with some of the people who are still working now in Oklahoma and sort of see them different places and
Well, during the time and era of Jerome Tiger, which was a very big inspiration to not only me, I like to think that I was a very he was my mentor, I guess, I should say, and which was the highest honor to me in that memory. I don't know if any of what you just asked is going to be anything later on, because as time goes along, he was many years ago, and you ask a lot of other artists, they don't even know who he is anymore, But the first 15, 20, 25 years, a lot of people knew who he was and inspired a lot of people. And then all of a sudden, it's a whole different movement. Young people coming up may see some of his artwork, but they really didn't know how he really had a big part in the art movement. It kind of reminds me of the Beatles. When they first came to the United States, there were no long-haired people with guitars, right? Everybody had short 50s crew cuts, you know, and then all of a sudden they came into the United States, and within a month later, everybody's got long hair and playing a guitar. That's how he affected the art world.
So we may be passing on some of this knowledge about, I guess, Indian art history along with those painting lessons.
I hope so. I hope just some of the things that I've done will eventually survive, and maybe it'll inspire some of the future generation. And if that happens, then it would have been well worth what I did. But I'm not looking for fame and glory. I want my art to be fame and glory, not me as a person.
Is there anything we've forgotten to cover before we take a look at your paintings? Anything you'd like to talk about that we didn't?
Well, let's see. I'd like to go back to my grandparents, some of the important parts that they played in my upbringing. Because back in our days, there was honor in our family. And very few families I've seen where there's honor anymore. And no, the young kids growing up are not learning from parents or grandparents. But these were different times, and this is a different time now too. This is the day and age of the computers and the iPods and the cell phones, and not once can you see a young kid walking down the street without texting or with a cell phone in their ear. Back in those days, we had our grandparents to listen to. We heard what they said. We heard the stories they told us. We watched what they did. Going out into the woods with my grandmothers, I watched some of the things that they dug up, some of the herbs that they collected, and they would tell us what this is. This is edible. This is what can cure your headache, or this is what can give your sore throat a relief, etc. and etc. How many young kids have grandparents that know these things today? Not very many. And then also, how many grandparents speak Cherokee? They can translate that to their kids. They may speak Cherokee, but their kids are not even understanding Cherokee. But they're teaching Cherokee again. But is it too late? Because the grandparents are dying with that knowledge. And that's one of the things that I really treasure the most, is some of these things that I learned from both sets of grandparents, and then also the spiritual things they talked about, the spirits out there that were active, the evil spirits, and then also people who did conjuring, you know, who did bad medicine to you. And grandfather used to say that nobody can do bad medicine to you unless you want them to. You have to let that in first. A lot of people say, oh, I stubbed my toe on a rock, somebody's doing bad medicine on me, so that opens you up. The rest is what you want to believe. Every time you fall down and land on your knees, you think somebody's conjuring you, you know. Or you wake up with the fever. Well, Joe Blow down the road is doing bad medicine on me. Come on. So that's some of the things that grandfather used to tell me about. He said a lot of people bring that on themselves, but he said there's these other things that you'll know when something else is going on. And even though both of my grandfathers were raven mockers, like I said first time, never once did I see them do any bad medicine to anybody. They were always healing people. at any given time, you could go to my grandfather's house and he'd have 10, 15 people for the weekend there that was looking for his spiritual guidance, his counsel, his medicine. And a lot of times they all stayed in that house and he would be healing them. And then also, he was never in need of anything because a lot of people paid him in so many different ways that he had plenty all the time. He had horses, he had cattle, pigs, chickens, you name it. People brought him these things because people did not have money. Every once in a while somebody had a dime or something. And then a lot of times when somebody couldn't pay him, just a simple thank you from the heart was more than you could ask for. That's what he used to tell me. He said he knew he felt that thank you because that's all they had to give. And that's how medicine, you know, worked back in those days.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I wonder if you'd like to talk a little bit. We'll look at a few of your paintings.
Okay, we can do that.
Is this Little People that she's got? Or?
Well, actually, that's another thing that a lot of people, a lot of Cherokees,
I'll have to talk
people
about that.
and suspicious people have a big thing about little people or fairies. You know, little fairies are little people too.
So yeah, so Little People are.
Yeah, she's the corn woman.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you see the corn in the basket, and this is actually somebody you know, right? Whose daughter you painted
yes,
as a model.
Scott's daughter's good friend from Sequoia, the high school there. Her name is Sunday.
That's
and
right.
she's quite a striking looking young lady, and I thought that her profile or her face made a good painting for this.
That's very nice.
And she's wearing a Cherokee roses. Yes,
Now the title of this one is.
Morning ceremony with the little people. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, tongue-tied.
You know, the little people, you know, they're the elders, you know, the holy men. It's kind of like at dawn, the little people were around the village, and a lot of times they came for protection. And then you can tell that some of them got caught before they got all leave. Here's one that's kind of still hiding, and then the rest of them are going back up into the mountains.
Oh, it's pretty, the little lights there.
And then also they're doing the medicine smoke, you know. And these are Cherokees. And then also he's a raven mocker. Horses are just, you know, that's really no story on them. It's just two colts and mama and then daddy looking on. That's
right.
Want to see the
Nice little family picture. Oh yeah.
That's what she looks like.
Yeah, that's a very good likeness.
That's the one I was talking about. Where
Let me try to come back.
The eagle is a good omen.
Sign of good medicine.
Sign of good medicine. Yeah.
Right.
And they feel like they're in the right place. And then also, as I said earlier, the setting, the sunset, sets the mood for them.
Right. And boy.
And everything that they're wearing, even to the facial tattoos, the arm tattoos, are historically accurate. I did a lot of research on that. It's a very, very interesting story, but it's been interpreted in so many different ways too.
Right.
And these are real faces. Actually,
yeah, they're very realistic.
Actually, this is Morgan, Scott's daughter, but her hair is dark. So actually, the corn woman had yellow flowing hair with the shock, you know. So that kind of distracts you from, you know, like you'd say that doesn't look like Morgan, but if it was darker hair, it looked like her.
Right.
And then this is her friends from the school.
Oh, okay.
And then this is another one of her friends from the school.
Uh-huh.
If I say,
Were they excited to be represented in one of your paintings?
We did G. Clay's on it, and we did Major Print.
Oh, great.
There's been different ways that people have interpreted that, and so this was my way.
Right.
Also, this one here is something on a humor side, so to speak.
Okay, great. We talked about humor, so.
It was something my dad told me one time when he went fishing, when he was a little bit younger. He said that of course he wasn't bow fishing, but he was just using a fishing cane. He said he'd had a pretty good afternoon, and he figured he'd caught enough bass, and so he reeled his line in, and there was nothing but fish heads on that line where he said a turtle had been eating his catch the whole time.
Oh, man.
So I kind of beat that up, so the turtle's eating his catch.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great.
The way he told it in Cherokee was funny.
Yeah.
He said, I pulled up my line and there were only fish heads there.
Oh, that's great. Okay. All right. Well, that's a nice sampling, and I sure thank you for your time today for this interview.